Hannah Miller thought she knew her brother Jacob better than anyone until the night she unlocked his basement door and discovered the truth about what he had become. Ridgewood was the kind of small town where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. The streets were quiet, lined with maple trees that turned golden in the fall, and most of the neighbors had known each other for years. It was the sort of place where people still waved from their porches and left their doors unlocked at night. Among all the familiar faces, the Miller family had always stood out, respectable, polite, and deeply rooted in the town's history. After their parents passed away a few years earlier, Hannah Miller had become the last person most folks expected to hear anything strange about. Hannah was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of woman who found joy in small things like painting on rainy afternoons or tending to her garden. She taught art at the elementary school, where children adored her for her calm, patient nature. She lived alone in the old family house, a two-story wooden home that creaked with every gust of wind but still held a certain charm. For years, she had kept to herself, content with her work, her routines, and the soft hum of peaceful living. Her younger brother Jacob was a completely different story. He had left Ridgewood right after high school, claiming he wanted to see the world. For nearly a decade, Hannah had only heard from him occasionally, a few scattered calls, short messages, and the occasional postcard from somewhere far away. When he announced he was coming back home, she felt a mix of happiness and relief. After all, family was all she had left, and she had missed him more than she wanted to admit. When Jacob finally arrived, he looked much the same, tall, confident, and with that easy smile that had always made people like him instantly. But there was something different in his eyes, something restless. He said he needed a fresh start, a new chapter away from the chaos of the city. Hannah welcomed him with open arms, happy to have someone else in the house again. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They cooked together, shared old stories, and laughed like they used to when they were kids. But after the first few weeks, Hannah started to notice small things that didn't quite add up. Jacob stayed out late most nights and never explained where he went. Sometimes she'd hear him moving around the house at odd hours, pacing in the hallway or whispering to himself. He became protective of certain areas of the house, especially the basement, insisting she stay out of it because he was working on something. One evening, a neighbor mentioned hearing strange noises coming from their property. Low, humming sounds that didn't quite sound mechanical or natural. Hannah laughed it off, insisting her brother was probably just fixing something down there. But that night, when the wind carried a faint echo from the woods behind their house, she couldn't shake the chill that crawled up her spine. Jacob's behavior grew more unpredictable as weeks turned into months. He would disappear for hours, sometimes days, and return looking pale and exhausted. When she asked where he'd been, he would smile vaguely and say he was just out clearing his head. Despite her unease, Hannah wanted to believe everything was fine. She told herself her brother had been through a lot and just needed time to adjust. What she didn't realize was that Jacob's fresh start wasn't about moving on from his past. It was about continuing something he had already begun, something he had brought back to Ridgewood with him, hidden behind that easy smile and the promise of a new beginning. It started with a locked door. Hannah had lived in that house her whole life, and there had never been a locked room until Jacob came back. At first, she didn't think much of it. Everyone needed privacy, and maybe he just wanted a space of his own. But over time, that door began to bother her. It was in the basement, a place she rarely went since it always felt damp and cold, with shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Yet every time she passed the basement steps, she could feel the air change, heavier somehow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jacob told her it was just a storage room, filled with old tools and paint cans. But something about the way he said it made her uneasy. His tone was flat, rehearsed, and his eyes didn't meet hers. After that, he began locking it every night. Sometimes she'd hear him down there, moving things around, dragging something heavy across the floor. It didn't sound like someone cleaning or organizing. It sounded like someone hiding something. One night, Hannah woke suddenly to the sound of a low hum. It wasn't the kind of noise you could easily describe. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't exactly human either. It came from beneath her, rising up through the wooden floors like a pulse. She sat up in bed, listening. The hum grew louder, steadier, almost rhythmic, followed by the faint flicker of light leaking through the cracks around the basement door. She wanted to call out to Jacob, but something deep inside told her not to. She waited until the sound faded, then spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding. The next morning, she tried to act normal. Jacob was already gone when she came downstairs, and his car wasn't in the driveway. She walked to the basement and stood at the top of the steps, staring at the locked door below. For a long time, she just listened. It was silent now. No humming, no movement, only the faint smell of something metallic lingering in the air. That smell stayed with her all day, clinging to her clothes, following her like a warning. When Jacob came home that evening, he seemed cheerful, almost too cheerful. He made dinner, asked about her day, and talked about fixing up the backyard. But she noticed his hands, small cuts across his fingers, faint red marks that looked almost like burns. She didn't ask what happened. She just smiled and nodded, pretending not to see. Over the next few days, the noises continued. Sometimes it was humming, other times it was a scraping sound, like something being dragged. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, that she was simply overthinking things. But the smell kept coming back, metallic, sour, wrong. She found it strongest near the basement door. Her breaking point came one afternoon when she went to tidy up the living room and noticed something out of place. The spare key to the basement, which had always hung in the old key box near the kitchen window, was missing. She searched the counter, the drawers, even the pockets of Jacob's coat when he wasn't looking. It was nowhere to be found. That night, Jacob left again after dinner, saying he needed to run an errand. Hannah waited until she heard his car disappear down the road. Her heart raced as she went to his room, hoping for a clue. Inside his desk drawer, buried beneath old letters and loose papers, she found the key. Her hand trembled as she held it, cold and heavy against her palm. She hesitated for a long time at the top of the basement stairs, telling herself she was only going to take a quick look. The lock clicked softly, the sound almost swallowed by the silence of the house. When she opened the door, the air that came out was thick and stale. She stepped inside, her flashlight trembling in her hand. What she saw in that room would change everything she thought she knew about her brother and about the home she had always felt safe in. Hannah's flashlight beam wavered as she stepped deeper into the basement room. The air felt heavy, almost pressing against her skin. The smell hit her first, a mixture of wax, metal, and something sour that made her stomach tighten. The walls were covered in markings, drawn in thick black lines that spiraled and intersected like a map of chaos. Some of them looked like symbols she didn't recognize, while others seemed to form distorted shapes of eyes and hands. In the center of the room sat a wooden table, its surface stained dark, surrounded by melted candles that had dripped and hardened into strange shapes on the floor. Her first instinct was to leave, to lock the door and forget what she'd seen. But curiosity and fear kept her frozen in place. She walked closer to the table, noticing small objects arranged carefully across it, feathers, bones, pieces of torn fabric, and a small, rusted box. There were notebooks stacked to one side, their pages filled with lines of frantic handwriting. She didn't dare open them. Her hands were shaking too much. The creak of a floorboard above made her jump. Jacob wasn't supposed to be home. She switched off the flashlight and stood completely still, barely breathing. Minutes passed before she realized the house had gone quiet again. When she finally left the room, locking the door behind her, her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. She put the key back where she found it, climbed into bed, and spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring into the dark. The next morning, Jacob acted like nothing was wrong. He laughed over breakfast, talked about fixing the fence, and asked if she wanted to go into town. Hannah could barely respond. All she could see when she looked at him were those symbols, those candles, that table. She needed to know more, but confronting him seemed dangerous, so she came up with another plan. While Jacob was out one afternoon, she set up a small camera in the basement. It was an old one she used for her art classes, barely noticeable among the pipes and shadows. That night, she waited upstairs with her laptop open, the live feed playing in silence. Hours passed and nothing happened. Then, at exactly 2:37 a.m., Jacob appeared on the screen. He moved slowly, carrying a box she hadn't seen before. He placed it on the table, lit the candles, and began whispering under his breath. The words were low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. His face looked tense, focused, his eyes locked on the box. When he finally opened it, Hannah leaned closer to the screen. Inside was a stack of photographs, faces she recognized. Neighbors, friends, people from town, each picture had a thick black X drawn across it. Jacob then pulled out one of the notebooks and began writing quickly, muttering names as he did. The movement of his hand was frantic, almost desperate. When he paused and looked up toward the camera's direction, Hannah's breath caught. For a moment, his eyes reflected the candle light in a way that didn't look natural. They seemed darker, hollow, like something else was staring out through him. She shut the laptop and backed away, trembling. There was no denying it anymore. Whatever her brother was doing in that room, it wasn't just strange or secretive. It was dangerous. The photographs, the symbols, the chanting, it all pointed to something she couldn't explain, something far beyond reason. As dawn crept through the windows, Hannah sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a cold cup of coffee. She knew she should go to the police, but how could she explain any of it? Who would believe that her brother, the charming, well-liked Jacob Miller, was doing something that looked like a ritual in their basement? She told herself she needed proof, something undeniable. But deep down, she already knew the truth. The brother she welcomed home, wasn't he the same man who had left Ridgewood all those years ago? Something had changed him, and now that change was spreading, quietly, beneath her own roof. The first missing person appeared on the news only a week after Hannah watched her brother's ritual through the hidden camera. It was a man named Richard Hull, a local mechanic whose face she had seen among Jacob's photographs. At first, the report was brief. A man failed to return home, last seen near the edge of town, no signs of struggle. Ridgewood was small, and missing people were rare. Everyone assumed it was a misunderstanding, maybe a short trip without warning. But a few days later, another name surfaced. Then another. Each time, Hannah felt her stomach twist as she remembered seeing those same faces in Jacob's box. She stopped sleeping properly. Every night, she sat by the window, waiting for Jacob to come home. Sometimes he didn't return until early morning, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes glassy and distant. Other times, he came back with mud on his shoes and that strange smell clinging to him, metallic and sharp. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear kept her silent. The more she learned, the more she realized she didn't want to know what the answers would be. The local news began to change its tone. They started using words like disturbing pattern and connected disappearances. Police were investigating, but they had no leads. Hannah watched the reports quietly, never mentioning them to Jacob, pretending she hadn't noticed how his hands trembled when the names were read aloud. She started avoiding him as much as possible, eating at different times, locking her bedroom door at night. Desperate for understanding, she turned to the notebooks she'd seen in the basement. When Jacob was out one evening, she went back down there. The air was cold and stale, and the candles had melted into the table, leaving behind hardened pools of wax. She opened one of the notebooks, careful not to disturb anything else. The pages were filled with symbols, drawings of circles and lines that looked like maps, surrounded by strange words written in uneven handwriting. In between, there were names, all of them familiar, the missing people. Next to each name was a date, and beside that, a small mark like a signature. She spent hours flipping through the pages, her heart sinking with every line. Toward the back, she found something different, a short passage written in a more controlled hand. It spoke about binding and exchange, about giving life for strength, about collecting what was owed. Hannah didn't understand the meaning, but she understood the intent. It wasn't a random obsession or a harmless ritual. Jacob was using these people for something, and he believed it was working. When she finally confronted him, it wasn't planned. She was too tired, too scared, too angry to keep pretending. He was sitting in the kitchen when she came in, staring out the window as if lost in thought. When she asked where he'd been, he turned slowly and said she shouldn't have gone into the basement. His voice was calm, steady, almost gentle, but there was something in his expression that froze her in place. It was the same darkness she had seen in his eyes on the video, the emptiness, the certainty. He told her she didn't understand, that everything he was doing had a purpose, that he was chosen. The words sent a chill through her. There was no hesitation in his tone, no trace of the brother she once knew. He spoke like a man repeating a truth he fully believed. When she tried to reason with him, his expression hardened. Then he smiled, a quiet, distant smile that didn't reach his eyes, and walked out the door. That was the last time Hannah saw him. The next morning, his car was gone, along with the notebooks and the box of photographs. She searched the entire house, every drawer, every corner, but it was as if he had erased himself. The police came when she finally called, though she didn't tell them everything. They found no signs of struggle, no trace of foul play. Jacob Miller was simply gone, another name added to the growing list of unexplained disappearances in Ridgewood. The town grew quieter after that. People stayed indoors after dark, windows locked, lights left on. Rumors spread, theories twisted into fear. Hannah tried to convince herself it was over, that he had left and would never come back. But some nights, when the air was still and the woods behind the house whispered with movement, she would swear she heard him again, that same low hum, rising and falling like a heartbeat deep below the ground. Months passed before Hannah allowed herself to enter the basement again. The door had remained locked since the day Jacob disappeared, but the silence of the house had become unbearable. The police had long stopped asking questions, and the missing people were slowly fading from the town's gossip. Ridgewood was trying to forget, but Hannah couldn't. Every creak of the house, every faint sound from the woods behind it reminded her that she had lived beside something she still didn't fully understand. The days blurred together in a kind of quiet dread. She returned to work, smiled for her students, and forced herself through routines that no longer felt real. Sometimes she would catch her reflection and barely recognize the woman looking back, pale, hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of something unspeakable. She had tried to convince herself that Jacob was gone for good, that the darkness he carried had left with him, but deep down she knew it wasn't true. One cold evening in late autumn, while cleaning the attic, she found an old trunk buried under a dusty blanket. It was one of Jacob's. The sight of it made her chest tighten. She knelt beside it, brushing away the dust, her hands trembling as she opened the lid. Inside were stacks of papers, yellowed photographs, and small objects wrapped in cloth. The smell that rose from the trunk was faintly familiar: wax, ash, and something metallic. The first thing she noticed were the photographs. Some were old family pictures, but others were of people she didn't recognize, taken in strange places: empty fields, wooded paths, abandoned houses. Most of them were marked with faint lines or symbols on the back, the same kind she had seen on the basement walls. Beneath the photographs were notebooks, their covers stained and warped. She hesitated before opening one, but curiosity won. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. Jacob's. The entries started innocently enough, describing dreams and feelings of unease, but as the pages went on, the writing changed. The words became frantic, the tone darker. He wrote about voices in the woods, about a power waiting to be claimed, about the exchange. He mentioned something ancient, something that demanded recognition. Hannah couldn't understand all of it, but one phrase repeated again and again: "They chose me." At the bottom of the trunk was a sealed envelope with her name on it. She sat for a long time before opening it, her hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old photograph. The note was short, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. It said, "I never wanted you to see this, but you need to know. They came for me, and I let them in. Don't follow me. Don't look for me." Hannah turned her attention to the photograph. It was one she had never seen before. She and Jacob as children, standing in front of the oak trees behind their house. But something was off. The photo looked aged, the colors faded, yet Jacob's eyes seemed to glow faintly red, like tiny embers beneath the surface. Confused, she went to find the original copy from their family album kept in a box in her closet. When she found it and held them side by side, her stomach dropped. In the original, Jacob's eyes were normal. She stared at the two photographs until her vision blurred, her mind trying to make sense of the impossible. The one from the trunk felt alive somehow, as if it were pulsing faintly beneath her fingers. She set it down quickly, her heart racing. A gust of wind rattled the windows just then, though the air outside was still. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hum rose, soft, slow, and familiar. That night, she dreamed of the woods behind the house. She saw Jacob standing among the trees, his face shadowed but unmistakable. His lips were moving, whispering something she couldn't hear. Behind him, the darkness shifted, forming shapes that seemed to watch her. When she woke, the sound of whispering still lingered, fading slowly into silence. The next morning, she burned the photograph, the notebooks, and the letter. She watched the flames twist and curl around the edges of the paper, but even as they turned to ash, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The humming never truly stopped. Some nights it was faint, barely audible, but always there, steady and patient, like something waiting. Hannah stopped talking about Jacob. She stopped trying to explain what happened. But sometimes when the wind moved through the oak trees and the moonlight touched the edge of the woods, she could almost see him standing there again, the brother she once loved, smiling that same distant smile, as if he'd finally found peace in the darkness he had chosen.